just what I was thinking.
Yeah. See, when we're not talking, we can hear them. It's supposed to be back. They're having too much fun without us.
No matter how many times we played it, all sounded the same thing. You can tell what the beginning was or the end. It's an infinite process.
And the first part of it is really, really quiet. You can't hardly hear it at all.
They're coming.
All right, good. Here we go.
It just ended.
Where's the music?
Ah.
Oh, sure.
We should have practiced this. Yeah, y'all did great. Alright, for those of you who may not know, I am Zip Zimmerman, and the facilitator of the first guided autobiography class that has been offered in San Diego, and certainly the first one that's been offered at this facility. So I need to thank LaRue. LaRue, thank you very much for allowing us to have the guided autobiography here. And my first thanks, second thanks, I guess, is actually going to go to the people who have been so courageous here to start writing their life stories. Some of you have already started them. Arlene, you've said you've been working on yours for a while. In this class, because it's a 10-week class, in the beginning people are a little nervous about sharing some of their life details. And this group seemed to, within the second week, I think Tom, you mentioned it, within the second week you had an essence of everybody that was in the group, which was very, very cool. You know, you've all shared some very interesting stories. I cannot tell you all the stories. They are confidential. For anybody who might consider taking this class, it is confidential, unless somebody has given us permission to share some of their stories. So we are very, very eager to have Miss Tammy Greenwood, who is a San Diegan, be our guest speaker today. She has written 5 books? 7 books? Okay, 7 books, and she has brought some of them here, so if anyone wants to purchase any of these, that's fine. She is our author speaker today, so I'm gonna turn the floor over to her, and then we'll continue afterwards, okay? Tammy, thank you.
First, thank you for having me. I'm very honored to be asked. And you guys are doing the brave stuff. See, I write fiction. I don't tell my real stories.
I thought some of theirs was fiction.
Probably more interesting than fiction. So I just was going to talk to you a little bit about why we do this, why we engage in writing, you know, what's the point of it? You know, why did you all register for this course? And a little bit about my own experience with writing and what writing means to me. And then I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have as well. I'm a novelist. I have 7 published novels and another one that will be out about a year from October. And so I've been doing this for a while, about 12 years, I think, since my first book came out, 13 years since my first book came out. And, but I've written since I was a little girl. I don't know how many of you have written since you were children or been fascinated by stories, but, and that really stemmed for me out of a love of reading. I read voraciously from the time that I could, you know, make sense of the words on the page. And I always compare the writing experience to the reading experience because for me they sort of happen simultaneously. And I read this wonderful book called The Bridge to Terabithia when I was little, which you may or may not be familiar with. It's about a little boy and a little girl who are best friends, and they have this magical place in the forest that they go to that they call Terabithia, and they have to get there by swinging on a rope swing across this creek, or river, I guess it is, and then when they get across, then their imaginations just sort of take over. And for me, writing was that rope swing. You know, it was really what let me imagine other places, other, you know, other worlds, other lives. I grew up in a really small town in Vermont, and with not a lot of stuff to do other than playing in the woods. And so for me, it was a real escape. Writing and reading both were the way that I traveled places. It allowed me access to other worlds. And I think to a certain extent, that's still the case. You know, I always joke that being a writer is the one occupation where you get paid to play make-believe, you know, as an adult. And I still feel that way. I think that the beauty of writing is that it enables you to go other places, and to take other people with you, your readers, right? And for you, that's your lives. You're giving your readers windows into your lives. For me, it's windows into fictitious lives. So I think, you know, it's a good opportunity to escape your own reality when you're writing fiction, or examining your lives, right? And that's what it sounds like you all have been doing, is that you've been facing the truths about yourself. And I think that fiction does the same. I really think that a good fiction writer shows you not only the lies, but the truths. And, you know, that's sort of my aim when I'm teaching. I always talk to my students about their poems or their stories being windows. And all you're doing is opening up a window and shining in light for your readers. And the more you read, the more windows that are open, the more light there is, and the more that things are illuminated, and the more that you can see. For me, I think the value of writing is that it also teaches empathy. You know, empathy is probably the most important human trait that anybody can have, is being able to understand other people. And that's why I write. I write to understand other people. Usually the way that projects begin for me is with an image of some character in some situation that I don't understand. And then I write the story to find that out and to figure out who these people are, how they got there. And some people write to teach and they have an agenda, but for me, I always write out of curiosity. I always write with a question in mind. And I think even, you know, if you're writing memoir or autobiography, there are still questions to be answered, right? And that exploration is how you answer those questions. So I thought, I don't know if you'd like me to, I thought Grace would be a good example of that. I was just going to read my opening chapter, which is very brief, but it's an image that I started with, and then talk a little bit about what I learned in the writing of this book. This book just came out in the end of March, so it's brand new. I'm kind of new at reading from it too, so, but it's very brief. It's just 2 pages. Kurt is suddenly aware of the way the snow looks like something living, like something with a purpose. He has always thought of snow as simply falling from the sky, at mercy to gravity. But now as he marches out across the snow-covered field behind the house, his rifle drawn and aimed at the back of his only son's head, he sees that it is intent in its falling, resolute, determined, even calculated in its descent. Trevor is 3 feet ahead of him, trudging through the snow, bare hands shoved into his pockets, head bowed in deference to the blistering assault. It is midnight, but the sky is opaque and bright. It is only December, but it has been snowing for 2 days straight. They are up to their shins in it. Trevor is not wearing a coat, hat, or gloves. He's in the jeans and navy chamois shirt he had on when Kurt dragged him from his room into the mudroom, where he had allowed him to put on his boots before pushing him through the door into the cold white night. As they pass the unmarked boundary between their property and their neighbors, Trevor hits a deep patch of snow and sinks in up to his knees. If you didn't know better, you might think he was praying, only genuflecting to the falling snow. As Trevor struggles to move forward, he glances over his shoulder at his father. For years, the arch of his brow, the thick dimple in his chin, the boyish smirk have been like reflections in a mirror held up to Kurt's own boyhood. This used to make him swell a bit with proprietary pride. But now these similarities seem to mock him, accuse him. You made this, they say. You are this. Dad, Trevor says, but Kurt can't hear. It's as though his head is full of snow, cold, thick, numb. Daddy. Snot has frozen in 2 slow paths from nose to lip. His eyes are swollen. Trevor is 13 and he looks exactly like Kurt did at 13. He's the same height, the same weight. He has identical ears, the same bent pinky finger, Kurt's slight overbite, and white blonde hair. When they finally get to the top of the hill where Kurt used to take Trevor sledding when he was a little boy, to the place where the entire world shimmers then disappears in the valley below, Kurt says, "Stop." The sound of his voice is like ice breaking, like springtime at Joe's pond when the ice goes out, the crack, the shift, the signal that the thaw has begun. But Kurt knows that this is a weakness he cannot afford. He must stay solid, frozen, numb. There cannot be any cracks, any fissures in this ice. They're far enough away now from the house where on any other night they would be sleeping, but the house is empty. There's no one to hear the gunshots. "Turn around," Kurt says. Trevor turns to face him again, but this time it's not the face of a child he sees, nor is it the face of the monster he has turned into. Instead, his hair is covered in a thin layer of white, and Kurt can see the old man each of them might one day become. Trevor puts his hands up as if his palms might be enough to protect him. "Don't, Daddy," he pleads. At this, Kurt lowers his rifle, turning his gaze from his son to the sky. He watches the shards of ice, the intricate, gorgeous filaments, as they continue to fall. And he thinks of the news footage he saw right after the attacks on the World Trade Center, before the media realized what they were showing. The men who broke windows, climbed ledges, and leapt to their deaths. The falling men, the men forced to choose one kind of a death over another. Kurt looks back at Trevor, who is crying now, tears and snot freezing upon impact with the air. He lifts his gun to his shoulder again, and the snow makes a lens of ice as he peers down the sight. So, there's a boom opening. So this is how the story came to me. This image of this man and his son in a field and a gun, and I didn't know who they were, why they were there, and I wrote this book to figure that out. And these were shoes that were hard to put on, boots that were hard to put on and hard to walk in. But I spent, the next 2 years and 400 some pages figuring it out. And what I realized over the course of the novel, after spending time with Kurt, he's struggling to keep his family together. They're nearing financial ruin. Their house is upside down. His father is living in a dangerous situation. His house is about to be condemned. Everything is falling apart for this man. And Trevor is being bullied at school. He's just tormented by these 2 particular boys who have made his life a living hell, and he has no one he can confide in except for an art teacher who gives him a camera. And I also spent time with Kurt's wife, Trevor's mother, Elsbeth, who is sort of struggling with some demons of her own. She's a shoplifter, just sort of a girl who had a lot of her dreams thwarted early on because of her pregnancy. And then the other character is a young girl who just appeared to me as well, who has given her baby up for adoption. She's a teenager, and she works at the Walgreens where Trevor brings in his film. He has a film camera to get the pictures developed, and then their lives sort of get mixed up together. And so I back up a year and follow them over the course of a year to this moment again, and then figured out why I'm there. But that's the way all writing is for me. I don't know that I would do it necessarily if there wasn't that curiosity and those questions and that sort of burning need to understand. And some books are easier than others. Some books I start and I know, enough about the characters that they just sort of take off. These characters I struggled with. Trevor was very easy, and I love Trevor. He came to me, and very quickly I figured out exactly who he was and what his troubles were. And Kurt was also pretty easy. Elsbeth was an enigma. This mother who had a really hard time loving her son. She has a daughter as well who gets sort of Grace, who gets all of her attention. And so she was very hard to be with, hard to spend time with. But again, I think that's what writing is about, is exploring lives, other people's lives, your own lives, and making sense of them as you go along. And by the end of this book, I cared deeply about each of these people, and I understood Kurt. I mean, it seems impossible, I know that, but I understood exactly how he got to that moment, and why he was where he was at the beginning of this story. So anyway, that's why I write, and I've done it with every single one of my books, is, you know, out of this inherent curiosity and this inherent need. I ask my students always to sort of examine not only, you know, why they write in general, but why this story? Why are you looking at your lives right now? There's a reason, right? You've got something that you are attempting to do, whether it's capturing your family history, or you know, leaving a legacy, or exploring why things happen to you, or things that you've done, which I'm sure you've all talked about extensively. I'm probably telling you what you already know, but I think it's really important to ask yourselves, you know, why am I doing this? Well, to what end? What is my point? So the last thing I was going to read was my answer. I do all of my exercises along with my students, and so this was an answer to that prompt. Why do I write? This is my answer. I write because I love language. I love the way that words trip and tumble across my tongue. I love the subtleties of it, the nuances, the power. I write because writing makes me happy in a way that nothing else does. I write because it allows me to tell enormous lies. But I also write to tell truths I'm too afraid to say out loud. I write to entertain myself, and I write to entertain others. I write because I have deadlines, but I would write even if no one cared whether I finished anything ever again or not. And I've written in the past without deadlines. I write because it's the one thing I'm good at. I write because when I don't, I feel sad and antsy. I write for my family, to preserve our history. I write to prove that I was here, that I lived in this world and felt things and loved things, that I experienced joy, that I despaired. I write for my children, and I write for the children they might one day have. I write because I have stories to tell, even if I don't know what they are until I put my fingers on the keyboard. I write to teach sometimes, but mostly I write to learn, and there's still so much that I don't understand. I write to make people laugh, and I write so that I will not cry. I write because I have no choice. I write to survive. I write to save others, and I write to save myself.